We have here a Marshall 1959 Super Lead reissue. Overall in really good shape. It came in because the owner wanted some new tubes installed and have them biased. And in the process of doing that, I discovered a few things that the owner did not know that were issues. And it's the kind of thing I run into a lot where the owner, the musician, does not really know what the variables are. And I have seen this lead both on general purpose music forums and on tech forums and in the comments of amp videos, including on this channel. A kind of real snobbery about, oh, how can they not know that? Why didn't they just X? Why didn't they just Y? Didn't they know that Z? And it really isn't helpful to anyone. It doesn't help the musician learn the thing that they need to know. It doesn't get the information out there in any usable way. And it doesn't impress anyone else that you or me or anyone else knows that. This is a real weird, esoteric bunch of stuff that most people never need to know in their lives. So it's not a failing of someone's character or intellect to not know these things. Why would they? If you have this information and you can help musicians, help them. Don't criticize them. That's one of the main reasons I started this channel, is just to educate players, hopefully with a little bit of sense of humor in the process, about how amps work. For example, in the other room right now, I've got a 70s Fender Bassman 10 that came in because one of the channels had no sound. I got it home. I found a bad preamp tube, V2, which is the preamp tube for the normal channel. I changed out that 12AX7. The amp came back to life. The amp is entirely healthy. A lot of techs in that situation would charge the full bench fee. I'm just charging them for the new tube and 30 minutes because I did carry it home and have to bring it back to the store next time I go to drop off. So yeah, maybe he could have, should have done it himself, and next time, because I will give him some nice notes on that, he can, and he will learn that in the process, and he can save himself a lot of money down the road potentially. On the other hand, when an amp stops working, it's not always just a matter of swapping the tubes, no matter what the forums say. You need to have a methodology to how you approach it. That methodology is a difficult thing to teach. That's another reason I try to include this kind of stuff on the channel, to show that methodology, or at least my methodology. I'm not showing it in this video, I'm just talking about it. But the principle remains the same, and you can see me troubleshoot so many amps on here. If you go through all the 66 Bassman Part 1, the evaluation, 78 Marshall Part 1, the evaluation, or initial inspection, whatever I've called it. A lot of those videos are really just amp diagnosis 101. Now, as far as this Marshall goes, this amp had 3 issues of which the owner was unaware. First of all, this amp is from 2001. And even though the amp came into me with an old quad of EL34s, it originally had 5881s as shipped from the factory from Marshall. I can tell that by the values of these 2 resistors and the grid stoppers on the output tubes. These 2 resistors are in the bias supply. So I called the owner and I said, hey, I put in the 34s, but they will not bias properly. I cannot get them over 30% dissipation with a stock bias circuit. I explained the 5881 versus EL34 thing. I said I can change these resistors and the grid stoppers and make this the EL34 version. And he said, whoa, hold the presses. I don't want anything changed on the board. I want the amp completely stock. And I said, that's fine, but we're going to need to get 5881s and you can return the 34s or sell them to someone else. So that's what we've done. He's going to sell the Groove Tube EL34s. He has the new Sovtech 5881s. The amp's going to be very happy with them. Had he known about this issue, he could have ordered the 5881s and would have had the amp back in one afternoon, but he did not. And hopefully he can sell or return the 34s. It adds to the time, it adds to the cost, it adds to the frustration. That information is out there, but most musicians won't even know to look for that because, hey, it's a Marshall. I bought it, it had 34s in it. Marshalls have 34s according to everything I see. What's the problem? The second problem in the amp was this input jack, or rather this input jack, which I have removed. The contacts were fatigued here on the tip, which is supposed to shunt out when nothing's plugged in. And if nothing was plugged into the amp would oscillate. It would pop when you plugged and unplugged. It was just generally unpleasant. I explained that, hey, that's a $3 part, And I can change that out using the exact same Cliff UK jack that Marshall originally did, which I have. And I can redo the wiring so that it'll look factory. I've done that. So he had just been living with that pop when you plug and unplug. And of course, he wasn't testing the amp with the guitar unplugged, but a bad jack happens. It had happened to him. And down the road, he would have noticed that because that would have gotten worse and would have become intermittent. So that's an easy thing to do. No big deal, but certainly something to note. More importantly, the owner bought 3 new preamp tubes for his amp, but the 3 preamp tubes he ordered, the Sovtech LPS, are poor choices for 2 out of the 3 tube positions in the amp. While it is a fantastic choice for a phase inverter, where low noise and a balanced set of triodes is great, the long plate structure of an LPS makes it microphonic for V1, which you'll hear in just a moment. And as a cathode follower stage, like V2 in this Marshall, where you have 200 volts or so on the cathode, the LPS, like most Russian tubes, will tend to die. So I've not even put it into V2 because I don't want to kill his nice new $30 tube. I've got a Chinese tube in there for now. I'll talk to the owner about different options for V2 and V1. You'll hear why on V1 in a moment. But how is he to know? It's a 12X7. Hey, that's supposed to be a good sounding 12X7, right? And the thing is, it's not the owner's fault. It's no failing of the owner. How would he know? Very few guitarists know this stuff. Not all techs know this stuff, that 12AX7s and 7025s and ECC83s are not all created equal. CV4004s. There are different variations of the 12AX7 design, and certain variations work better in certain positions, and there are differences due to the plate length or the robustness of the cathode, et cetera, how the filaments are wound. You can get way in the weeds on this stuff. It's a lot for anyone to keep track of. In general, I would say that players should go to actual tube vendors who know about the amps and the tubes. So the Tube Store, Eurotubes, Tube Depot, lots of great choices out there. But when you just go to a big box store, if you go to Guitar Center, if you go to Musician's Friend, Z-Sounds, all these things, they're just going to sell you a tube, and you just say, hey, I've heard good things about that, I'll get 3 of those. Well, that's a great choice for a phase inverter. Let me show you why it's not a great choice for V1 in a Marshall. Here's a Sovtech 12AX7A in the same position. Still a little bit of microphonics, but nowhere near as much. That kind of microphonics that LPS exhibited can lead to squealing in an amp like this. It will not hurt anything for this LPS to be in there, but it is not the optimal choice, and I'll talk to the owner. He really needs new tubes for these 2 positions. Maybe he can return those LPSs. Let me show you one other thing. All right, I have both channels on, and as you can hear, it's really noisy and hummy and buzzy. But this amp is sitting on my bench. It's not installed in the chassis with the grounding shielding plate. Once that metal plate is there, the noise floor decreases a lot. So when you hear my videos, when you watch me working on amps, sometimes you're going to hear noises, and I would be like, yeah, the amp is sounding good. You're going to say, well, what about that noise? Don't you hear that noise? I know a lot of noises go away once the shielding is in place. Now watch this. As soon as I lift this shield up, this metal, at a slight distance from the metal from the amp, is going to form a capacitor. The noise is going to get worse, and then it'll get better as I move the chassis away, the shielding away, and then I'll put it back in place, and the noise will go away. So it's going to be really noisy now. Gets better as I move away. Gets worse again, and then it's gone as long as that's making contact. So when I judge an amp on its stability, et cetera, its noise floor, I always test in a shielded environment, even if you don't see me do that, because I have to know what the amp's going to sound like in a real world situation. And that goes for the self noise, even with the volumes at 0. Now the amp has got a slight hum, which is always fun when you're trying to set the bias, because when I'm setting the bias, I want almost no signal present at all, including hum. So a lot of times when I set a bias, I'll find ways to do this just to get rid of that. Anyway, I hope all this nattering on both helps you as a player or as a tech, but also just remember, and this sounds really namby-pamby, I guess, when it comes to other musicians and their amps and what they should or should not know, being kind doesn't cost a damn thing. No one's going to be really impressed if you know that. People will remember you kindly if you take the time to gently explain things to people and help people along. So I guess that's my namby-pamby message for today. Rather than judging people for not knowing all this stuff, teach them. Teach them.